There is a kind of man who never raises his voice. And yet, when he speaks, the room changes. People stop interrupting him. People stop testing him. People simply listen. He has never thrown a punch. He has never slammed a door. He has never screamed to be heard. And yet, somehow, he is never disrespected twice. Today, you will learn the 5 phrases this man uses. Phrases sharpened by Marcus Aurelius on the frontier of an empire, by Epictetus in the house of a man who once owned him, and by Seneca in the court of an emperor who could end his life with a single word. These are not tricks. They are not manipulation. They are ancient verbal armor, and by the end of this video, they will be yours. Stay with me, because the 5th phrase is the one that changes everything. Let me ask you something, and I want you to actually sit with it for a moment. When was the last time someone spoke to you in a way that left you feeling small? Maybe it was a co-worker who cut you off in a meeting. Maybe it was a partner who knew exactly which words would wound. Maybe it was a stranger, in traffic, in a store, in a comment section, who decided, for no reason at all, that you were an acceptable target. And in that moment, what did you do? If you're like most people, you did one of 2 things. You either swallowed it, smiled, nodded, walked away feeling that familiar burn of humiliation sitting in your chest for the rest of the day. Or you exploded, raised your voice, said something you regretted, and handed the other person exactly what they wanted, proof that they could control you. Both of these responses have one thing in common. They both lose. The Stoics understood something almost 2,000 years ago that modern psychology is only now beginning to prove with research. The loudest person in the room is rarely the most powerful one. Volume is not authority. Anger is not strength. And the desperate need to be heard is, paradoxically, what makes people stop listening to you. Marcus Aurelius commanded the most powerful army on earth. He could have silenced any man with a gesture. And yet, in his private journal, the one he never intended for anyone else to read, he wrote about restraint, about choosing words with the same care a surgeon chooses where to cut. Epictetus was born into slavery. He had no power, no army, no status. And yet, through nothing but the discipline of his speech and his mind, free men traveled hundreds of miles just to sit at his feet and learn. How he carried himself like a king while owning nothing. Seneca served an emperor, Nero, who was, by every historical account, a man capable of monstrous cruelty. One wrong word, one moment of weakness, and Seneca's life would end. And yet he survived for years in that court, respected even by people who feared him because of how he spoke. What did all 3 of these men know that we've forgotten? They knew that respect is not demanded. It is not shouted into existence. It is built, sentence by sentence, silence by silence, through a kind of verbal architecture so precise that other people feel it before they understand it. Today, I'm going to give you 5 phrases. 5 exact tools built on Stoic principles that you can use the very next time someone tries to disrespect you, dismiss you, or push you around. But I need you to understand something before we begin. These are not comebacks. They are not designed to win an argument or humiliate another person. The Stoics would have found that vulgar. A victory that costs you your own dignity is not a victory at all. These 5 phrases work because they come from a place of internal stillness. They are the output of a much deeper practice, one we're going to walk through together, one phrase at a time, with the stories, the history, and the psychology behind each one. If you're new here, this channel exists for exactly this purpose, taking 2,000-year-old wisdom and making it useful for the life you're actually living today, in your office, in your relationships, in the quiet moments where no one else is watching how you carry yourself. So if that's something you want more of, consider subscribing. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who need to hear this now. Let's begin with the man who taught an empire how to be calm. Picture this: Rome, around 60 AD. A young man named Epictetus stands in the household of Epictetus, a wealthy, powerful freedman who serves the emperor himself. Epictetus is property, not an employee, not a servant who can quit. Property. History tells us that his master was, at times, cruel, that Epictetus's leg was permanently damaged, likely from abuse, possibly from a beating so severe it left him lame for the rest of his life. And yet, and this is the part that should stop you in your tracks, Epictetus never became the man his master tried to make him. He developed in the middle of captivity one of the most powerful ideas in the history of human thought, the dichotomy of control. Some things are within our power, our judgments, our impulses, our desires, our aversions, and some things are not within our power, our body, our reputation, what other people think of us, what other people say to us. Here is the phrase this idea gives birth to, and I want you to really feel the weight of it. That's not how I see it. 5 words. No anger, no defensiveness, no raised voice. And yet watch what happens when you actually use this phrase in the real world. Imagine you're in a meeting. A colleague, maybe someone who's been waiting for an opportunity to undercut you, says, in front of everyone, "Honestly, I think your approach here is kind of naive." The old you, the version of you that hasn't done this work, yet might feel your face get hot. You might stammer out a defense. You might over-explain. You might, worse, attack back. And now you're the one who looks unprofessional in the meeting, even though you didn't start it. But the Stoic response, the Epictetus response, sounds like this. That's not how I see it. Here's my reasoning. Notice what just happened. You didn't fight for the right to be respected. You simply assumed it. You treated the insult as what it actually was, an opinion, not a fact, not a verdict on your worth. This is the core of Epictetus's teaching. He has a famous formulation often paraphrased as, "It is not events that disturb us, but our judgments about them." Someone insulting you is just sound waves. It is your interpretation of those sound waves. This means I'm inadequate. This means I should be ashamed. That creates the suffering. When you respond with, "That's not how I see it," you are doing something profound on a psychological level. You are refusing to outsource your self-worth to someone else's opinion. You're saying, in essence, you are entitled to your view, and I am entitled to mine, and neither of us needs the other's permission to hold it. Think about the people in your life who seem unshakable, the ones criticism just slides off of like rain off a coat. I'd bet money that internally, they're doing some version of this. They've separated the event. Someone said something from the meaning, what that something says about who they are. And because those two things are separated, the insult has nowhere to land. Here's a real-world texture to this. Epictetus used to teach his students an exercise. When someone insults you, imagine they're throwing a small stone at you. The stone hits your toga, not your skin. It falls to the ground. Did it hurt you? No, because you weren't attached to catching it. The next time someone tries to provoke you, a comment online, a backhanded remark at a family dinner, a manager who talks down to you in front of the team, try saying it, out loud or in your mind first, until it becomes natural. That's not how I see it. You'll notice something strange happen. The other person, expecting a fight or expecting submission, gets neither. They get calm, and calm, when it's unshakable, is the most unsettling thing you can offer an aggressor, because it tells them instantly that their weapon doesn't work on you. I want you to remember this phrase. Write it down if you need to, because the next phrase builds directly on top of it. And it comes from a man who had every reason in the world to defend himself and chose not to. Let's go to a different time, a different kind of pressure entirely. Marcus Aurelius did not have the luxury of being a private philosopher. He was the Roman emperor, arguably the most powerful man alive. During a period of relentless war, plague, betrayal, and grief, he buried multiple children. He fought wars he didn't want. He dealt constantly with senators, generals, and family members who challenged him, manipulated him, and tried to provoke him into rash decisions. And in the middle of all of that, alone at night, in a tent on some freezing frontier, he wrote to himself, not for an audience, not for history, just for himself, trying to remind himself every single day how to remain the kind of man he wanted to be. One of the recurring themes in his private writings is this: people will be unreasonable, ungrateful, jealous, and dishonest. Expect it, he tells himself, and do not let it disturb your inner citadel. From this comes our second phrase, which is slightly different in flavor from the first. Where Epictetus's phrase protects your inner judgment, this phrase protects your boundary, calmly, without aggression, while still moving forward. I understand you're upset. I'm still going to finish. Let's break down why this phrase is so quietly devastating in its effectiveness. First, I understand you're upset. This is not weakness. This is not appeasement. This is acknowledgement, and acknowledgement is one of the most underrated tools in human communication. Most conflict escalates because neither person feels heard. When you say, I understand you're upset, you are not agreeing that they're right. You are simply confirming, I see your emotional state, and I'm not afraid of it. Second, I'm still going to finish. This is the boundary. No justification, no groveling, no over-explaining why you have the right to keep speaking, keep working, keep existing in your own decision. You simply state the fact of your continued action. Think about how rare this combination is. Most people, when confronted with someone's anger, do one of two things. They either collapse and abandon what they were doing to manage the other person's emotions, or they get defensive and match the anger, escalating the conflict into something neither person wanted. Marcus Aurelius modeled a third way. In his writings, he reminds himself repeatedly that other people's bad behavior is not a reason for you to abandon your own standard of behavior. He has a line, often paraphrased, about how the best revenge is to not be like your enemy, to not let someone else's poor character infect your own. Let me give you a scenario, because I think this phrase needs to live somewhere real for you to actually use it. You're presenting an idea at work. Halfway through, someone interrupts, loudly, dismissively. This is a waste of time. We already tried something like this. Here's where most people go wrong. They either stop entirely, flustered, ceding the floor to someone who simply spoke with more confidence than facts, or they snap back, well, clearly you didn't try it right. And now the meeting is a battlefield instead of a discussion. The Marcus Aurelius response: I understand you're frustrated. I'm still going to finish explaining this, and then I'd love to hear your concerns directly. Do you feel the difference? You haven't dismissed them. You haven't fought them. You've simply refused to let their emotional outburst hijack your right to finish your own thought. And critically, you've modeled in real time exactly the kind of composure that makes a room trust you more, not less. There's something deeper here too, that I think is worth sitting with for a moment. Marcus Aurelius ruled during the Antonine Plague, one of the deadliest pandemics in the ancient world, which may have killed millions across the empire, possibly including members of his own family and household. He governed through grief, through fear, through a population that was, understandably, sometimes desperate and lashing out. A lesser man would have ruled through fear, matching the chaos around him with cruelty of his own. Instead, his writings show a man constantly trying to discipline himself toward patience, toward fairness, toward treating people well even when they didn't deserve it, not because he was naive, but because he understood that how you treat people in their worst moments is the truest test of your own character, not theirs. This is the architecture beneath, I understand you're upset. I'm still going to finish. It's not just a clever sentence. It's the verbal output of a man who has decided ahead of time that other people's emotional weather does not get to dictate his own internal climate. Practice this one specifically with people who tend to use anger as a tool to control you, because that's exactly where it's most powerful. The moment they realize their anger no longer changes your behavior, something remarkable happens. They usually, eventually, calm down. Because the entire purpose of their outburst to control the room has failed quietly, without a single counterattack from you. Before we go further, I want to ask you something, and I'd genuinely love to read your answer in the comments. Which of these two phrases do you think you need more right now? That's not how I see it. For protecting your inner judgment, or I understand you're upset, I'm still going to finish for protecting your boundaries under pressure. I read these comments. They shape future videos on this channel. So don't just scroll past. Actually tell me where you're at. And if this is landing for you so far, a like on this video helps it reach other people who are dealing with the exact same situations you might be dealing with right now. It costs you nothing, and it means a lot to this channel. All right, let's continue, because phrase number 3 deals with something almost everyone struggles with: the subtle, slippery disrespect that doesn't even look like disrespect on the surface. Seneca lived one of the most precarious lives of any philosopher in history. He served as advisor and tutor to Nero, a man history remembers as one of the most volatile and dangerous rulers Rome ever produced. Seneca's wealth, his proximity to power, and his philosophical reputation made him a target for jealousy, manipulation, and political maneuvering from every direction, constantly. In that environment, you don't survive through brute confrontation. You survive through perception. You have to see manipulation before it fully unfolds. Read the subtext beneath people's words and respond in a way that neutralizes it without ever giving them the satisfaction of an open conflict. This brings us to our third phrase, which I'd argue is the most quietly powerful of the 5, because it deals with the kind of disrespect most people don't even consciously register happening to them. I notice what you're doing. Let's talk about what this phrase is actually for. Some disrespect is loud, a shout, an insult, an obvious provocation. But far more disrespect in daily life is subtle. The backhanded compliment, the passive-aggressive comment disguised as a joke, the colleague who forgets to include you in an email chain repeatedly in a way that's clearly not actually forgetting, the friend who undermines you with humor. "Oh, don't worry about him, he's always a little dramatic," said with a laugh, so that if you react, you're the one who seems oversensitive. This kind of manipulation thrives on one thing: plausible deniability. It only works if you don't name it. The moment you name it, calmly, without accusation, without anger, its entire power structure collapses. I notice what you're doing. That's it. No explanation needed. No demand for an apology. No escalation. You are simply letting the other person know, "I see the game. I'm not playing it the way you expected." Seneca writes extensively in his letters about the importance of clear perception, of seeing situations and people as they actually are, rather than as we wish them to be or fear them to be. He talks about how much of our suffering comes not from what happens to us, but from our refusal to clearly see what's happening to us, often because seeing it clearly would require us to act, and acting feels uncomfortable. There's a particular kind of person, maybe you know one, who relies entirely on the unspoken nature of their cruelty. They need you confused, slightly hurt, but unable to point to exactly what happened. The moment you can point to it, even gently, they lose their primary tool. Let me give you an example with some real texture. Imagine a family gathering. A relative makes a comment, something like, "Wow, you're still doing that job? I thought you'd have moved on to something real by now," followed immediately by a laugh, as if it's just teasing. Most people freeze here, because reacting feels like overreacting to a joke, but staying silent feels like swallowing the insult whole. The Seneca response, delivered calmly, maybe even with a slight smile of your own: "I notice what you're doing. You don't actually need to do that." You haven't accused them of anything dramatic. You haven't created a scene. You've simply held up a small, clear mirror to their behavior, and most people, when confronted with that mirror in front of others, immediately back down, because the unspoken nature of their cruelty was the entire point. Once it's spoken, it loses its disguise. This phrase works particularly well with what we'd now call passive aggression, but the Stoics would simply have called it a lack of self-command, someone trying to feel powerful by destabilizing you, rather than by building anything real in themselves. I want to be clear about something important here, because I think it matters. This phrase is not about becoming paranoid, seeing manipulation in every interaction, treating every joke as an attack. That would be its own kind of disturbance, the very opposite of Stoic clarity. This is a tool for the moments when something in you already senses that a line has been subtly crossed, and you've been suppressing that instinct because you didn't have the words to address it without sounding dramatic. Seneca himself was a man of immense privilege and immense danger simultaneously, wealthy, beyond most people's imagination, yet one political misstep from execution. He understood, better than almost anyone in history, that survival in a treacherous environment requires clear sight, paired with measured response. Not paranoia, not aggression, just clarity spoken plainly at the right moment. Use this phrase the next time someone tries to disrespect you in a way that's designed to be deniable. You'll be amazed at how quickly the temperature of the interaction changes because you've just shown them that their favorite tool, plausible deniability, doesn't work on you anymore. Now we move to phrase number 4. And this one is about something almost nobody talks about. The respect you command not through what you say to others, but through what you refuse to say about yourself. Here's something I want you to really think about, because it might be the most uncomfortable truth in this entire video. A huge amount of the disrespect we experience in life isn't actually forced onto us by other people. It's something we invite unconsciously through over-explaining, over-justifying and over-apologizing for things that require none of those things. Watch how often this happens in your own life. Someone asks why you didn't come to an event, and instead of a simple answer, you give a 3-minute justification, almost pleading for their approval of your choice. Someone questions a decision you made, and instead of standing on it, you immediately start defending it like you're on trial. This pattern has a name in Stoic philosophy. Though they didn't call it this directly, it relates closely to what they called prohairesis, our faculty of will and judgment, the part of us that chooses how to respond to the world. The Stoics believed this faculty was the one thing that could never be taken from you by external forces, not by slavery, not by exile, not by an emperor's decree. It was the one truly free part of a human being. But here's the catch. You can still give it away voluntarily. Every time you over-explain yourself to someone who hasn't earned the right to interrogate you, every time you beg for approval you don't actually need, you are voluntarily surrendering a piece of that freedom, handing someone else the authority to judge your choices, when that authority was never theirs to hold in the first place. This brings us to phrase number 4. I don't need to explain myself. I want to be very precise about how this phrase is meant to be used, because used wrong, it can sound arrogant or dismissive, and that's not the Stoic intention at all. This phrase is not for your spouse, who deserves transparency about decisions that affect your shared life. It's not for a close friend who's genuinely concerned about you. It's not for a manager asking a fair question about your work. This phrase is for the people who have no actual standing to demand justification from you, but who act as though they do. The distant relative who interrogates your life choices at a holiday dinner. The co-worker who isn't your manager, but speaks to you like they are. The stranger online who feels entitled to your time, your patience, and your defense of decisions that have nothing to do with them. Picture this. Someone asks, with a slight edge in their voice, "Why aren't you married yet? Don't you think it's time?" A question loaded with judgment disguised as curiosity. The old response, the one most of us default to, is some version of nervous over-explanation. Well, I've just been focused on my career, and honestly, the right person hasn't come along. And I do want kids eventually, it's just... Notice what's happening. You're defending a decision that required no defense, to a person who has no actual authority over your life. Every word you add is, in a sense, a small surrender of your prohairesis, your sovereign right to choose your own path without needing anyone else's approval of it. The Stoic alternative, delivered evenly, without hostility, I don't need to explain myself. But thank you for your concern. Or depending on the tone you want, that's not something I feel the need to justify. This is not coldness. This is boundary as dignity. You are not attacking the other person. You are simply declining to enter a courtroom they tried to construct without your consent, where they appointed themselves judge of your life. I think about Epictetus again here, a man who, even after gaining his freedom, lived an extraordinarily simple life by choice, with almost no possessions, no luxury, no status symbols. People around him, accustomed to ambition and accumulation, must have questioned this constantly. Why don't you want more? Why don't you seek a higher position? Why live so simply when you could live so much more comfortably? And his answer, in spirit if not exact words, was always some version of, "This is my judgment, formed through my own reasoning, and it requires no external validation to be correct for me." This is the deepest form of respect-commanding behavior, because it doesn't depend on a clever sentence in the moment of conflict. It depends on a prior decision made, long before the confrontation ever happens, that your choices belong to you, and explaining them is a gift you can choose to give, not a tax that others are entitled to collect. Here's a practical note before we move to the final phrase. The reason most people can't say "I don't need to explain myself" and have it land with calm authority is that internally they're not actually sure their choices are justified. If there's a flicker of doubt in you about the decision itself, this phrase will come out sounding defensive instead of grounded, because the words are right, but the internal state behind them isn't settled yet. So the real work isn't memorizing the sentence. It's doing the quieter work, alone. Honestly, the way Marcus Aurelius did in his journal, of actually examining your choices until you trust your own judgment about them. Once that internal settling has happened, the phrase becomes almost effortless to say, because you're no longer performing confidence. You simply have it. And that brings us to the fifth and final phrase, the one I promised you at the very beginning of this video. Because everything we've discussed so far has been about how to respond in the moment of disrespect. This last one is different. This one is about something that happens before any of these moments even arrive. Then that's their loss, not mine. The final armor. Let's end where true Stoic strength actually lives, not in clever comebacks, but in a complete shift of where you locate your own worth. Here is a truth that took me a long time to fully understand, and I think it's the single most important idea in this entire video. Every one of the 4 phrases we've covered so far can still fail. If you don't have this 5th principle underneath them, you can say, "That's not how I see it," with perfect calm in your voice and still feel destroyed inside, replaying the conversation for hours afterward. You can deliver, "I understand you're upset. I'm still going to finish," flawlessly, and still go home and cry in your car about it. The words aren't the armor. The words are just the visible tip of something much deeper. And that deeper thing is what this final phrase represents. Then that's their loss, not mine. Let me tell you about a moment in Marcus Aurelius's life that I think captures this perfectly. Despite being emperor, despite holding more formal power than almost any human being in recorded history, he was, by multiple historical accounts, criticized, doubted, and even betrayed by people close to him. One of his own trusted generals, Avidius Cassius, rebelled against him, declaring himself emperor while Marcus was away dealing with other crises. Imagine that betrayal. A man you trusted who served under you, deciding the empire would be better off with you dead and him in your place. And yet, according to the accounts that survive, when the rebellion collapsed and Cassius was killed by his own soldiers before Marcus could even respond, Marcus reportedly expressed something close to grief rather than vengeful satisfaction, wishing, supposedly, that he could have spoken with the man, perhaps even forgiven him, rather than celebrating his death. Think about what kind of internal architecture allows a man to respond to attempted murder and usurpation with something closer to sorrow than rage. This is a man who had so thoroughly separated his sense of self-worth from other people's. opinions and actions that even the ultimate betrayal, an attempt to take his very life and throne, didn't shatter his internal composure. This is the energy behind, "Then that's their loss, not mine." Here's how this phrase actually functions, psychologically and philosophically. When someone disrespects you, mocks you, dismisses you, or betrays you, there's an automatic human impulse to ask, "What's wrong with me that this happened?" We internalize other people's poor behavior as evidence about our own worth. The Stoics rejected this completely. They believed, and this is foundational to almost everything we've covered today, that other people's behavior is a reflection of their own character, not a verdict on yours. If someone chooses cruelty, that cruelty reveals something about them. It reveals nothing reliable about you at all. So when someone disrespects you and you respond, internally and sometimes out loud, with, "Then that's their loss, not mine," you are doing something extraordinarily liberating. You are refusing to accept ownership of a problem that was never yours to own. Let's make this concrete with one final scenario, and I want you to really picture yourself inside it. Imagine you've poured genuine effort into something, a project, a piece of art, a business idea, anything that matters to you, and someone dismisses it cruelly, maybe even publicly. This is amateur. I don't know why you even bothered. The wound here isn't really about the words. It's about the fear underneath them, the fear that maybe they're right, that maybe your effort really was inadequate, that maybe you really don't measure up. But here is the Stoic reframing, the one that Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca all return to again and again in different forms throughout their writings. You do not control how people receive your effort. You only control the integrity of the effort itself. If you gave it your honest best, judged by your own honest standard, then someone else's failure to recognize that effort is a limitation in their perception, not a flaw in your work. Then that's their loss, not mine. Say it slowly. Notice that it doesn't deny the other person's right to their opinion. Remember, that respects the same principle from phrase 1. It simply refuses to let their opinion become the final word on your value. You are allowed to disagree with their judgment entirely, calmly, without needing them to ever admit they were wrong. This is, I think, the true secret behind every person who has ever made you think, "How is he so unshakable?" It's not that they've found magic words that defeat every insult. It's that somewhere along the way, often through real suffering, real loss, real reflection, they came to a settled internal conclusion. My worth was never up for a vote in the first place. Epictetus, a man who started life enslaved and ended it revered, used to teach something close to this directly. That external things, your reputation, your possessions, even your own body, are not truly yours in the deepest sense. They can be taken. What cannot be taken, what remains entirely yours no matter what anyone does or says, is your own faculty of judgment, your own character, your own choice about who you decide to be in response to what happens to you. When you fully metabolize that, not just intellectually, but in your bones, the 4 phrases we covered earlier stop feeling like performance. They stop feeling like things you have to remember to say under pressure. They become simply who you are. The calm isn't a mask anymore. It's the truth. Let's go back to where we started. The man who never raises his voice, and yet the room changes when he speaks. I told you at the beginning that he's not using tricks. Now you understand why. He's not performing calm in the moment of conflict. He has already done the deeper work, the work Marcus Aurelius did alone in his tent at night, writing to himself by candlelight after burying people he loved. The work Epictetus did, sitting with the reality of his own enslavement and somehow emerging with more freedom of mind than the men who owned him. The work Seneca did, walking every single day through a palace that could end his life on a ruler's passing whim, and choosing clarity over fear. None of these men were given respect. They built it through the slow, unglamorous daily discipline of mastering their own minds before they ever opened their mouths to anyone else. And here's the most important thing I can tell you before we close this video. You don't need anyone's permission to start that work today. You don't need a perfect moment, a dramatic confrontation, or a clean slate. You simply need to take the first phrase, any of the 5, and use it once. Just once. Notice how it feels. Notice what happens in the other person's face when they expect a fight or a collapse, and get neither. That single moment will teach you more about Stoic strength than this entire video could ever explain in words. So let's bring it all together one more time, because repetition is how wisdom actually becomes wisdom, rather than just an idea you liked for 20 minutes and then forgot. That's not how I see it. Protects your judgment from Epictetus's wisdom on the dichotomy of control. I understand you're upset. I'm still going to finish. Protects your boundary, the way Marcus Aurelius protected his composure through grief, plague, and betrayal. I notice what you're doing. Pierces through manipulation, the way Seneca learned to see clearly in a court built on deception. I don't need to explain myself. Reclaims your proheresis, your sovereign right to your own choices. And then that's their loss, not mine. The foundation beneath all of them. The settled internal truth that your worth was never anyone else's to decide. I want to ask you something honestly, the same way I'd ask a friend. Which of these 5 do you think you're going to use first? Tell me in the comments, not the one that sounds the coolest. The one you actually honestly need this week. I read every comment on these videos and I promise you, you are not alone in whatever situation brought you to this video today. If this video gave you something real, even just one sentence you're going to carry with you, do me a favor, and hit like before you go. It's a small thing for you, but it tells YouTube to show this to someone else who's dealing with exactly what you're dealing with right now. Maybe someone who needs it even more than you do. And if you want more of this ancient Stoic wisdom, translated into the exact words you can use in your actual life, in your actual relationships, in your actual workplace, subscribe to Wisdom of the Stoics and turn on notifications, because we publish new wisdom every single week that the algorithm won't always show you unless you ask it to. Marcus Aurelius once reminded himself that he wouldn't live forever, that none of us do, and that the only real question is what kind of person we choose to be with the time we're given. You don't need to shout to be respected. You never did. Go be unshakable.